There we go, Abby. That's why I rely on you. Otherwise, I would never get anything done. All right, take two. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the best practices of website design and user experience. This is the third and final of our website design focused episodes in our 2022 best practices series. And you might know me by now, as I've been the host of pretty much every webinar we've done this year, but I'm the director of client experience at Keystone Click, and with me today, Abby. Abby, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Abby. As Spencer said, I'm the digital content manager at Keystone Click. So we're really excited to jump into kind of how we can optimize content for user experience and how we can make some cute little websites.
Definitely. And Abby and I have worked here together for 2 years, but never presented a webinar together. So this is a very exciting day. First,
Very exciting.
Let's get right into it. What are we going to talk about today? So, might have guessed it, we're talking about user experience. So as well, what we've covered so far, homepage, design, user flow, those all play into user experience. So we're going to cover some of those main points before we get into the meat of the presentation, where we're going to cover some color palette, font selection, how you can maximize your site navigation to achieve that maximum user friendliness, parent page design and child page design, making sure that those two are distinct and user friendly, ensuring that your website is responsive across all devices, some general best practices to keep in mind while you're designing any page or working on any website edits to ensure that user friendliness, organizing your content, and lastly, we'll touch on accessibility. So without further ado, let's get into a bit on what we've talked about so far. So going to go through this pretty quick just because we've already covered all this, but the purpose of your website at the end of the day is to help you get found, build trust, educate, inform, nurture, and convert. It's called your 24-hour salesman for a reason. And a lot of times it's that first impression that people have with your brand. So it's really crucial that you are making a good first impression with a really user-friendly site. So moving into the homepage, and if you've been to a webinar with us before, you'll know that we like to talk about the three-step billboard test. So essentially what we look at for this is you're driving down the highway and you see a billboard. And when you see that billboard, you want to know three things. It's clear what that billboard's saying, what they're offering, their credibility is there, and call to action. You know, is it call someone? Is it send an email? What's the call to action? So we say the same thing about your homepage to ensure that user friendliness. So first, your offerings need to be clear. It needs to be shown that you can help that visitor solve their problem. And then you need to showcase your credibility, because if they don't trust you to get the job done, they're not gonna lead to conversion. So showcase your credibility. That can be through testimonials, or our example, showcasing the webinars we presented, podcast episodes, websites we've done, so on and so forth. And then last but not least, call to action. So ensure your call to action is clear and obvious what that next step is you want to take. Is it to contact you? Is it to book a meeting? Just make sure that you're always leading that user to the next step. And that brings us into a bit more about homepage content. What more content should you have? Attention grabbing headline, easy navigation, which we'll get into in a bit. Subheading that does introduce your offering, a primary call to action, visual image. Everyone likes those visual images nowadays. It grabs the attention right away. Your benefits, that goes into kind of that credibility side. Social proof, success stories, once again, the credibility. A lead magnet, so maybe it's a freebie, maybe it's a secondary call to action, something that's a freebie for folks. Once again, the secondary call to action, then anything to showcase your credibility more. So resource, awards, credentials, that'll help them move on to the next stage. Getting into what we covered in that second webinar, which was about the user flow. So a user flow is just that outline of every step the user takes to complete a specific task or action. So it's really just that map of direction. So once someone gets to your website, what's that next step you want them to take? And it's really important that you outline user flow and you really work on your site's user flow, because this helps. They play hand in hand with what your user needs are and how you help solve them and how you achieve your goals as a business. So you really want to outline what you're doing to spot any problems where, is this link not leading them, a visitor, to the place they want to go to? So you can reduce that friction leading them to that next step. Because having a great user flow helps with conversions. It'll help you improve your sales funnel. And it just, at the end of the day, it demonstrates that you understand the problem that your audience is coming to you to solve and are able to guide them along their journey to find the information that's right for them. So that's a bit about what we've covered so far. So I'm going to pass it off to Abby to talk a bit about user-friendliness.
Yeah, of course. So we want to just get started with just some user-friendliness basics, right? First things first, as with all of your marketing and your website, everything should be customer focused, right? Even though it's easy for us to get kind of distracted with exciting animations or like some really, really cool design that we think looks really cool, what comes first and foremost is what the user will find most useful and most interesting. And sometimes that is, depending on the brand, sometimes that is a really cool design. Sometimes it's just keeping it really clean and simple. When in doubt, always keep it as simple as possible. Additionally, user-friendly design makes sure that your users can find the information that they've navigated to your site to find. We want to make sure that that information is right up top, it's easy to find, and that'll help increase conversion rates from your website too. Next, we're going to talk really quickly about the 4 most important aspects about a user-friendly site. First is clear, easy to read text. This is a really, really big one that seems simple, but doesn't always follow through. You want people to come to your website to consume information. If they can't read that information, then it's kind of all for naught, right? One thing to be sure of is that when you have text overlaying images, you want to make sure that that image is dark enough and that the text has a big enough contrast from that image that it's easy to read. Second, images or graphics that support the information on the site. Of course, we want a really visually attractive website, but we also want to make sure that whatever visual media we're using really supports the information that we already have in text form, and it's the information that users are coming for. Third, clear buttons and calls to action so that users know where to go next. Spencer touched on this a little bit, but we want to make sure that when users see a button, they know where it's going and that they see the button in the first place. They should really, really stand out compared to the rest of the design. Finally, is easy to find navigation. We want to make sure that the menu is either across the top or in that top right-hand corner, because that's where users are most likely to look for it, and that's where they're going to expect to find it. We want to make sure that as users are engaging with our site, they can go back and forth from where they've been and really make sure that they know where they're at. Next, this is one of my favorite things to talk about, picking a color palette. Your website should really only use 3 to 6 colors. If you use more than that, it's getting a little bit too busy and it's kind of detracting from your brand. The 3 most important colors, and then maybe you have some neutrals supporting that, are your primary color, your secondary color, and your alert color. For this palette that you see on the right, I would call this top blue the primary color. That's the color you'll use most across the site, and it'll really anchor in with your branding. So maybe it's a color that you pull from your logo, but it's the most prominent color of your branding so that users know whose site they're on. The secondary color, it might be a neutral you see in this palette that I've made. It's kind of a darker color, which is always helpful too as a neutral. Definitely should be a complementary color to the primary because you're going to have these colors next to each other quite a bit. You want to make sure they look good together. Finally is that alert color, which would be that pink. You can see that it really stands out against the dark blue especially, but against the medium blue as well. You'll use that color for buttons and calls to action so that users see it on the page and they're like, ooh, this is something I should click. This is something that's important. Next is choosing readable fonts. Like I said, this is really, really important because we want users to be able to easily digest the information on our site. Serif fonts are a really great font family to choose. They look really good on web. Not all fonts that are good on a physical piece of paper are as legible on web. So definitely when you're choosing fonts, make sure you're looking at them on a screen, which seems really intuitive, but doesn't always happen because users are going to see, of course, your website on a screen. So we want to make sure that your fonts are legible on a screen as well. I've included a screenshot of a site that I really like to use for font combinations. It's called fontjoy.com. And it gives you 3 choices of fonts for like a heading, a subheading, and body copy. And you can kind of move it to be more contrasting or less contrasting. And these are all free fonts as well. So that is a really good resource to try out if you're choosing fonts for a website.
Cool. All right, folks, let's get into some navigational best practices. So first things first, keep it simple and easy. You don't want it to be super overcrowded. Best practices is to keep it at around 5, maybe 6 at max navigational main header items. So try to strive for that. But in the event that you do have to go higher than that, try, as this example shows on the right, try grouping them. So, you've got in the top image or the top part of the screenshot, it's over complex. You don't know where to click, but at least the bottom one that shows, 2 different categories that these other navigational items fall underneath. So really strive for simplicity and to make it as easy as possible. So that's just the grouping example we've got right there. As Abby mentioned, either have it at the top, definitely have it at the top or the top right of your website. And once again, really strive to bring down the amount of items you have to make it really obvious for your end user who's going to be visiting your site. So moving on to what to call menu items. So there are a few different strategies you can use to call your navigational items. So one, you've got action-based. And action-based is really good when you know that your audience is coming to your website for a specific action. So we've got this example from Howard University here. They know that their audience, they're either going to be potential students or for the most part, past students. So they've got apply, visit, give, really action-oriented items that are clear and obvious for the visitor what they want to accomplish once they get to the site. The next would be object-based. So once we talked about object-based, that's one of the more clear and simple examples that we've got. That's the HubSpot on the bottom. So it's really just placing all your content under concrete categories. So they've got blogs, newsletters, videos, podcasts, resources. So really easy to organize your content, really easy for the users to find what they want. And another way to kind of look at the object-based naming system would be to also, you could do topic-based as well, as we've got that another Navco example right there. So they've got resources, articles, case studies, webinars, videos. How does the user know what they want, which one best suits their interests? So that could be a strategy right there, instead of saying what the resources are, but categorize them under specific topics. So once they go to resources, they can pick the topic that best interests them, and then they can find the corresponding resource, whether it be an article, case study, webinar, video that suits their interests the best. Moving on to a true or false. So feel free to just think about this, but when you're looking at your navigation from left to right, so your most true or false, once again, your most important item should be at the start and your least important should be at the end. Think about it. Abby, are you thinking about it?
Thinking.
Okay, good job. All right, so gonna go through the slide and then we'll see what we think the answer is. So realistically, and best practice is to put your most important items at the start and your least important at the middle. So that would be false, the past one. So the reason why is that kind of in this work we called primary recency bias is you've got those items at the start being the most primarily recalled words. And then at the end, that's the most recent words that they get to. So those are the ones that they remember as well. That's kind of why at the beginning, you'll usually have your product services, maybe about, if that's important to you. At the end, always best practice to have contact us, or that primary call to action. So moving on again, another best practice to employ on your site to increase that user friendliness is a site search function. And the reason for this is that, let's say someone gets to your site, can't find what they want right away, but they don't feel like going anywhere else. And they say you've got a site search. They can search for that topic and then find those corresponding, whether it be resources, products, or services. So kind of just goes back to the stat that's at the bottom, where 50% of users, if you do have that site search bar, they're actually going to go straight to it, as opposed to going search on your navigation. They'll go straight to the search bar to identify whether you have the product, service, resource that best fits their needs. So helps increase conversion rate and is great for the overall health of the site and great for the visitor of your site. Moving on.
All right, now we're gonna chat about parent pages versus child pages and kind of what the difference is and kind of what each are used for. Your website should have 3 different types of pages. First is your home page, which is obviously your website's main landing page. It's the page that people see right when they open up your website. Next are parent pages. These are the main pages you see in your navigation. So you can see in the example I provided, the parent pages are about, products, join the team, and contact us. Then are the child pages. These are the subpages in each drop-down menu under the parent pages. So you can see again, under the about parent page, the child pages are sustainability, production capabilities, testimonials, meet the team, and news. This is just an easy way to categorize your pages, just like Spencer was just talking about, so that users have an easier time of finding information on your site. So each parent page header on your site should look the same, so that while users are navigating around your site, they know whether they're on a parent page or a child page. Obviously, they wouldn't think about that terminology, but it's easier for them to find out where they are if all those pages look uniform. So it doesn't only help navigation, but it also helps your site look and feel cohesive and consistent, which is one of the biggest parts of website design, and really all design, right? Everything should look and feel like it goes together nicely. If your content allows for it, something to consider is using a similar content structure on each parent page as well. Again, just to kind of help navigation and that cohesive feeling. Next is child pages. Just like parent pages, all child pages should have the same look and feel too. Keep the headers uniform and simple here. These are kind of the minutia of the information on your site. So there's no reason to go above and beyond with your headers. They can stay nice and simple, like the sustainability header that you see below. In order to distinguish your parent pages from child pages, one really easy, quick thing that you can try to make that distinction is to play around with full width versus containered pages. Maybe your parent pages are full width, your child pages are containered, just to kind of make that distinction from page to page.
For sure. So let's move on to some content layout. And as Abby was mentioning, really the key is when it comes to content is consistency. So you've got your parent pages and child pages. It's crucial to make sure that your content looks and feels consistent across all those pages. So all your parent pages are looking consistent and your child pages are consistent. At the end of the day, it's all consistent with the brand as a whole. So let's move on to some ways to lay out your content. We covered a bit of this during our homepage webinar, and this does apply mainly to the homepage, but this can also work on some of those parent and child pages as well. So the PAS framework, this stands for problem, agitation, solution. So it all starts with identifying what the problem that the user is thinking about, and is specifically the problem that they're having. And then you agitate them. It's kind of like twisting the knife a little bit by agitating and pointing out the annoyances of them not having the problem solved. And then you present the solution. It's almost like a little story. I know you've got a problem. Here's what you don't, here's the problem. I guess the problem within the problem is because you're not experiencing these benefits, and then the solution. The next framework that we had talked about is the AIDA model, which is attention, interest, desire, action. So you start by grabbing their attention, getting them engaged with a really attention grabbing headline and something that makes the user stop for a second and think, what was that? So then you give them persuasive messaging about the benefits of the solution. And really the key of that is to have a killer hook. So make sure your messaging is that persuasive. And then the user is now thinking about it, they're considering. So you need to create messaging from there about the user envisioning themselves on the other side of that problem. And then you finally get them into the action with a call to action. So those are kind of the two frameworks we laid out specifically for the homepage, but can be utilized on other pages. And if you're interested in checking out the homepage webinar, shoot us an email and we'll send you the recording. So moving on to just content layout. The key to user friendliness from a content perspective is making sure it's easily digestible. So plan your information architecture. That's kind of what Abby was mentioning. Plan how you're going to structure your information on your parent pages. Plan how you're going to structure your information on child pages. So how your information is organized and presented on your website is extremely important for the usability. Plan your website in sections and categories about how you're going to present that information. And one of the easiest ways to do that is by chunking your information. No one likes reading big blocks of text, large paragraphs. So really focus on breaking it up. You know, can you add an image? Can you add a header to separate the sections with numbered or bulleted lists? So on and so forth. Anything you can do to make it easier for your visitor to digest smaller pieces of content without feeling overwhelmed is good for usability, and yet it once again helps them find what they want quicker. Keep forms as simple as possible. You know, a lot of times you're going to want them to say something specifically to the problem they have, but when in doubt, you don't want them to have to work hard to submit themselves, or not, I guess not submit themselves, but to offer their information to you as a lead. You don't want to add any friction, any barriers in between that. So try to keep it as simple as possible. First name, last name, email. Those three things are really all you need at the end of the day. The other things you can add are like you've got here, company name, phone number, and then comments, inquiries. Always make that one optional though. If they don't want to add any comment inquiry, that's fine. But if they do want to add to their problem, talk about their problem or add a little comment, that's even better. And then we're going to keep stressing this, but consistency is key across all pages. So make sure you've got those specific layouts for your parent pages, child pages, and that you're consistent throughout the website in terms of your brand colors and fonts. So moving on to mobile friendliness. And we stress this more than anything nowadays because about 50% of your website traffic is actually coming from people on mobile devices, whether it be a cell phone, or a tablet or something of that nature. It's not just desktop anymore. So really, mobile responsiveness is crucial. And having a responsive design means having an incredibly highly flexible website structure that kind of molds itself soundly to any type of formatting it's displayed on. So ultimately, you really just need to ensure that you're building your website on a responsive content management system, and so that it is automatically reshuffling that content to fit the dimensions of the device the user may be using. And really, you want to make sure you have your site's mobile friendly from an SEO perspective and a user friendly perspective. So moving on, I guess one more thing to chat about when it comes to mobile responsiveness is the size of your buttons, the size of your text. Really, you need to make sure that your text is still going to be readable and your buttons are still going to be clickable, but not so small and congested that once someone does click a button, they could be clicking something else. So making sure that there's enough space in between each, whether it be a navigational item or a call to action, and making sure it's readable are the big things there. So moving on.
All right. One of the big things that often happens with not just website design, but all design, is things tend to get really busy because we want to use cool elements and we want to make sure that we have as much information as the user might need, right? The thing is that busier is not better. White space is one of the most important aspects of design, but it's also probably the number one thing that people forget about. A crisp and clean design, it doesn't only make your information really easy to digest and really easy to see, it also makes your brand feel more luxurious. The example I've included here is like thinking about Walmart versus Target. At the end of the day, they sell essentially the same products, right? But going to Target feels like an elevated experience just because it's brighter, it's organized better, and you don't have stuff all over the place, right? So one site, of course, and one brand that uses white space really, really effectively, of course, is Apple. And I've just included, this is just a screenshot from their homepage. You can see right here, they want you to look at iPhone 14, learn more and shop. That's it. They know what's important and they've really boiled it down to just those key principles, and you're not distracted by anything else.
Could you send me that page, Abby? I'm in desperate need of a new phone.
You sure are. Your phone's so old.
I know.
Next is clickable items and CTAs. Like Spencer was talking about, you get to choose a user's most likely path when you're designing your website. Of course, that's not to say that some users won't go rogue and not follow that path, but more or less, the structure that you use on your website will decide how people navigate through it. To create this path, make sure your calls to action and buttons are really, really clear, right? And don't forget about design hierarchy. The most important information should be at the top of your page, at the center of your page, or as the most noticeable thing on the page. I've included this example from the University of Wisconsin, kind of like Spencer was saying before with Howard. They know that people are coming to their site for three big things: visiting campus, applying, and exploring majors. And they have those three kind of paths set up right away, top of the fold. And then people can go down that path and the next page will lead them somewhere as well.
All right, now we've talked about a lot of design elements that Abby and I were chatting about. Let's talk about accessibility and why accessibility is so important nowadays. You know, you don't want your website to only be for people who, I guess, use or fine with reading, but you want to make sure that your website is accessible for all people. So there are some web accessibility standards that you want to strive for your website to adhere to. And after we go through the 4 standards, we're going to talk about some examples of or best practices of how your website can maximize the accessibility, the user friendliness of your site from that perspective. So perceivable. So your visitors, they need to be able to perceive or understand and be aware of the content that's presented on your website. So it needs to be clear and understandable, your content, easy to see, easy to interact with, so on and so forth. And that brings us to the next one, which is all about the interacting with the website. So when your site is operable, it means that it's able to be utilized. Things are able to be clicked on. You're able to navigate without your experience being disrupted. So that kind of goes back to what Abby was saying, you know, make sure that things that look clickable are clickable. You don't want to have any underlined stuff when the rest of the content on your website that's underlined are links, but in this case, it's not. You know, make sure that things that are clickable, that look clickable are, and all your call to actions are clear and obvious. Understandable. All content on your website, whether it's written or graphic, it's got to be understandable by visitors. So this both applies to the content on your website and the overall structures. So being able to navigate, so on and so forth. So this will get into alt text on images, making sure you've got other ways to digest the content. Then robust, which pretty much means that your website's got to be highly technical and that it can be accessible for people who use assistive technology, for instance, screen readers. So now we've talked a bit about those 4 standards that we should be striving for on websites. I just clicked on accident. let's talk a bit about how we can make that happen. So maximizing your site's perceivability. So adding alt text in to all non-text items on your website is an easy step. Let's say you've got an image. It's really easy to just add alternate text, describe what the image is, so that anyone, in the event that the screen doesn't, or the image doesn't load, or someone has seeing site troubles, that they're able to digest the content as well. Making the content easy to see and hear. Offer transcriptions in audio, in why can't I think of the word? What's the closed captions for any videos or audio content? You know, here's an example of our CEO Lori Hybe's podcast. Not only do we have show notes that contains every question, every answer throughout the podcast, but if you scroll down to the bottom, there's actually an uploaded show transcription that from start to finish gives you the timestamps of when things were said, so on and so forth. So making things as easy to digest as possible. As then going back to what Abby was talking about when it comes to color and visual information, make sure you utilize color contrast effectively, as well as that white space, because white, it's easy to add a call to action that contrasts with that white background. So yeah, really make sure that you don't have any colors clashing or anything that blends into the background of your site or any of that other color. Make sure you have that contrast. Then you want to structure your content in an adaptable way. So that kind of goes back to making sure that it's digestible for your end user by grouping content, using those headers, images, lists, so on and so forth, making it digestible. Talking about operability. So ensure that your whole site is functional via keyboard. So if someone doesn't have a mouse, they should be able to use the little keypad on their computer to scroll, to click, so on and so forth. Make sure that you allow visitors to digest content in a reasonable time. So here's an example for you. If you've got a drop-down menu, a lot of times a mouse slip happens and then someone will go off the menu. Don't have that menu disappear right away and then they have to go back to scroll over the menu item. Make sure it stays there for like a half a second or a set time limit so they can get back on and find their spot again. And as well, if there are any actions on your site that has any time limit, make sure you provide users with the options to extend or cancel it, as well as the drop-down example that I'd mentioned before. Last, avoid blinking or flashing content that can cause seizures in some cases. So just don't do it. Simple as that. The last two, understandable and robust. So let's talk about understandable quick. Making text content readable. That goes back to not choosing some crazy cursive font or text that looks like my handwriting. Make sure to pick an easy to read font. And along with that, make sure that your navigational items are clear and obvious. Don't use any cute language where it might be confusing for the user to click on or find what they want. And avoid using industry heavy jargon. You know, we always say write conversationally. If you're having trouble not using the industry heavy jargon, act like you're talking to a prospect. You're at like a networking event, how you describe your business just in plain English or your benefits that you provide. So write conversationally, be clear, concise, and obvious, and make sure that's readable. Structure your pages logically. Make sure, as Abby's mentioned, you have your most important pages or most important information at the top. Don't put I'm trying to come up with an example here. Don't put the checkout button on a products page before they even get to check the sizes, I guess. That's just a dumb example. I don't believe any sites do that. Maybe Zara, Abby.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you want a good example of a not user-friendly site, check out Zara. Zara's a clothing brand. The site is really, really hard to navigate. I would highly encourage you to type it into your search bar and like see what's going on. So it's a good example of what not to do. Definitely.
And that goes back to the navigation, because their navigation is pretty much invisible with how it doesn't contrast with anything on the page. And it's in like the middle left. or something like that. So place your navigational links in places where it's easy to find. Really, user friendliness is not that complex. It's just about being as clear and obvious with your information as possible so that your visitors don't experience any of that friction finding what they want to experience. Robust, ensure that your HTML code is well written. And that comes back to picking a great CMS, a great web development partner that has the abilities to write that HTML code that works, that is well written, robust, which that brings us into, I believe, a couple of CMSs that we recommend. So Squarespace and WordPress, the two different CMSs for kind of two different audiences. So when we're talking about Squarespace, we're looking at solopreneurs, those companies that maybe have one or two services or just have a few products or serve a super niche industry, something where their offerings can be put on just a few pages. And WordPress is more for those larger companies who are looking for something a bit more advanced, have a lot more products, a lot more services, a lot more content at the end of the day. So the big reason for both of these is user friendliness from not only a site visitor perspective, but also the experience for yourself when building or making edits on the site. These two CMSs make it super easy for you to go in, make changes, build a page without having to do any complex code. They're already going to be responsive. That great HTML code, it's going to be robust because that's already pre-built for you depending on the block you enter in. But some other benefits to WordPress are that they're going to come with there's open source. The plugins are free, or the plugins are available for you at all times. Super flexible and adaptive, so it's going to be responsive already on mobile. So on and so forth. So those are two we definitely recommend. There are others that do work. You know, there's Drupal out there, and we've built plenty of Drupal sites in the past. But nowadays, we definitely recommend WordPress. So that is what we have for you. Before we get into questions, let's take a quick peek at the summary and what's coming up next. So really, your user friendliness or user-friendly website just ensures that users are able to find the information that they're looking for easily without having that friction. It gets back to that user flow, making sure that they're flowing to their next spot with ease, making sure that your navigation is simple and navigable. That's a big word, as possible. So really trying to keep those navigational items down to 5, maybe 6 maximum, and make them clear and obvious. Design on your parent and child pages must be consistent. As we mentioned before, consistency is key. Ensuring that all those clickable items are clickable, call to actions, links, what have you. Make sure that they're all clickable, sign looks clickable. And making sure that your site is accessible from the user's perspective. So pretty much everything that we've talked about today just goes into that accessibility, making sure that you're making it readable, allowing users to find what they're looking for, so on and so forth, as well as the alt text for images and taking those next steps. Yeah, those are going to play into that user friendliness as well. Oh boy, that was a lot. So let's talk about what's next. So we are offering a free website where we're going to look at the SEO of your site, homepage. We're going to do that fun, dandy 3-step billboard test, but feel free to do it on your own. It's a great test just to gauge the success of your homepage, and easy to make changes based on that. Then take a look at your website content as well as your social media content and bring you some content ideas, because we like putting out content. So, and the link in the follow-up email, if you're interested in that, there'll be a meeting link with me. And so feel free. Moving on to what's next. So now we've talked about, what have we talked about? We've talked so far this year, we've talked about content creation, SEO, websites. And up next is email campaigns. You know, email campaigns, it's high ROI. You're not spending any money to send out emails. So let's be effective in doing it. So we're going to talk first in October about creating targeted email lists so that you're identifying your audience. You're going to be able to send them emails that are relevant to them. November, we're going to get into the fun stuff, which is the building of the campaigns and actually running those email automations and best practices for that. And in December, we're really going to focus on how you can increase your open rate. Email campaigns are only successful if they're going to be getting those opens and clicks. So we're going to be looking at some of those analytics, how you can gauge those, and how you can maximize your subject lines as well to get more people reading it. Because at the end of the day, people open emails for two reasons. It's because they know who it's sending, who know who it's being sent from, or the subject line resonates with them. So we'll get into December. More information will follow on that. But yeah, that's it. Reach out to us if you have any questions, and looks like we do have a few seconds for a question if anything pops up. I do have one for Abby, actually. Abby, you ready for a question?
Oh boy.
So when we're talking about the background of the website, just be white, or are there situations where it makes sense to have the background of the website be different color?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no reason that it has to be white, especially if white, like bright white, isn't part of your branding. I would suggest definitely a neutral color, and lighter colors tend to be a little bit better as well. Sometimes having a dark color with light text can be a little bit harder to read than a dark color on white. Yeah, a dark color text on a white background. Having a lighter, brighter color keeps your site feeling a little bit cleaner and a little bit crisper. But again, if your branding colors are a little bit warmer, then a bright white probably isn't the right choice. I would go for a softer white, or maybe even like a warmer gray, but definitely keeping it not too big of a color, not too much personality, just for the background. That was a good question.
This, folks, is why Abby is better at designing things than me, because I had no idea that there were different kinds of whites. All right, folks. Well, thank you for joining us. We'll stay in here for like another minute or so in case any last second questions come in. But otherwise, have a great rest of your Thursday. It's almost the weekend. See you guys.